these waters, they never stay calm. Not for long. Because they are teeming with the stuff of life, of life. The energy of our being washes over and around us. Let us brace each other when we need to stand against those currents. And let us hold hands when what we need is to just relax into the waves, riding them together.
And our next reading is from chapter 1 of the book of Jonah, the Chad Revised Version. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, saying, "Get at once to Nineveh and tell them to get their act together so I don't have to smite them." But Jonah thought a good smiting is just what Nineveh had coming. So he hopped on a boat for Tarshish, a far-off city where God couldn't find him, because Tarshish is ridiculously hard to say. God saw what he was doing, though, and sent a storm to batter the boat. Well, this freaked out the sailors, who prayed to their gods for help. And all those gods said, "Sorry, man, not our business." Meanwhile, Jonah slept like a baby through the whole thing, until the captain woke him up and said, "Seriously, how can you sleep through this? Some god is throwing this boat around like a bath toy." And Jonah told them, "Oh, shoot, yeah, my bad. That's my God, the Hebrew God. He wants me to save the Ninevites, and, well, I don't want to because, you know how they are, right? I say let them get smited." Smitten? Well, you know what I mean. But the storm got worse, and the sailors got more scared. So Jonah told them, "I guess you'll have to throw me overboard." They didn't want to do that, so they tried to row to shore. God, however, was having none of that, and the boat stayed caught in the storm. So they finally tossed Jonah into the sea. Then God sent a big fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah stayed in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights.
So Jonah's got a problem. No kidding, you say. He's in the guts of a fish. Ew. And yeah, okay, sure. But the big fish isn't Jonah's problem. The big fish is where he is hiding from his problem. And we all have a big fish. You might think that as soon as he found himself in the belly of a fish, the first thing Jonah would try to do is, get out, light a fire like Pinocchio did, something. But no. The book of Jonah tells us, in the original version, not just the Chad version, Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah settled in. He made himself comfortable. He looked for a Wi-Fi signal, I don't know. Because living in fish guts was more comfortable than changing his mind and opening his heart. Because you see, Jonah's problem is that he hates the Ninevites, hates them. And he wants to be vindicated in his condemnation. To know that they are not just his enemies, but God's enemies. They were doomed to destruction. Jonah had proclaimed their destruction himself, and he was a prophet for God's sake. He was on the side of his God and of righteousness. And Jonah's real problem, his real problem, is he knows that if he goes to Nineveh, And the Ninevites might listen to him if he talks to them the way God asked him to go talk to them. They might listen. And if they listen, God might spare them and include them in the whole of the divine human family. Well, Jonah is having none of this. Jonah wants satisfaction, not uncomfortable notions of universal grace. He wants his prophecy to come true and his enemies to suffer. He wants to be right. And so Jonah sits in his big fish for days because he knows as long as he stays there, he won't have to confront uncomfortable ideas. Ideas like, what if the people I hate are also worthy of love? It's just better and easier to flee from the presence of his Lord, as the book of Jonah put it. Look, I get Jonah's problem. I don't want to have to answer that question either. It is the question that makes universalism what Reverend Forrest Church called such an exacting gospel. A question that makes even Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron wonder if holding compassion for everyone might be a mission impossible. Because that compassion has a no exceptions clause. We Universalists might think of it as an inherent worthiness clause. And whatever we call it, it's what Jonah was hiding from in the belly of that big fish. He's not alone. I mean, I assume he was alone in that one big fish. But we all have a big fish. Someplace we can cling to the idea that the other is other. Mine has a couch where I can watch The Daily Show and John Oliver and Stephen Colbert and Seth Meyers and laugh at my Ninevites in self-congratulatory glee. Because we all have our own Ninevites. I mean, it's an election year. A lot of us probably share the same Ninevites. And we have a good reason to be angry with them, distrustful, maybe sometimes even like Jonah, hateful. Our Ninevites are hateful, so we get to hate them right back. Question is, how long can hate keep us comfy in the belly of a big fish? Maybe a long time. But also maybe let's not find out. Our evolving universalist theology calls us to hold each other and ourselves accountable through a spiritually disciplined love, to not let self-righteousness shield us from the reality of our interdependent existence. Now, a spiritually disciplined love is not a mindless love. If we are going to welcome the difficult idea that all people deserve to be free from suffering, we also have to make space for the unpleasant truth that there are people choosing to inflict suffering. We don't serve anyone by pretending those people aren't causing harm. We can instead adopt an attitude of, I love you, and no. Doing what we can to stop them, still wishing for them to find well-being and ease. God did send Jonah to tell the Ninevites to knock it off, after all. There's compassion in that approach, but also practicality. People who are freed from suffering, Buddhism teaches us, are way less likely to lash out and cause more suffering. But for that to happen, we have to see each other. So we're going to need to climb out of the belly of our fish. And I hate to break this to you, but there is no way to do that that isn't kind of icky and gross. And all we can do is drag ourselves to shore, brush off the sand and the fish guts, and try. Now a reading from Big Fish by Daniel Wallace. On one of our last car trips, near the end of my father's life as a man, we stopped by a river and we took a walk to its banks, where we sat in the shade of an old oak tree. After a couple of minutes, my father took off his shoes and his socks and placed his feet in the clear, running water, and he looked at them there. Then he closed his eyes and smiled. I hadn't seen him smile like that in a while. Suddenly, he took a deep breath and said, "This reminds me." And then he stopped and thought some more. Things came slow for him then, if they ever came at all, and I guessed he was thinking of some joke to tell because he always had some joke to tell. Or maybe he might tell me a story that would celebrate his adventurous and heroic life. And I wondered, what does this remind him of? Does it remind him of the duck in the hardware store? The horse in the bar? The boy who was knee-high to a grasshopper? Did it remind him of the dinosaur egg he found one day, then lost? Or the country he once ruled for the better part of a week? "This reminds me," he said again, "of when I was a boy." I looked at this old man, my old man with his old white feet in this clear running stream, these moments among the very last in his life. And I thought of him suddenly and simply as a boy, a child, a youth with his whole life ahead of him, much as mine was ahead of me. I'd never thought of that before. And these images, the now and the then of my father, converged at that moment. He turned into a weird creature, wild, concurrently young and old, dying and newborn. My father became a myth.
When our family's beloved elderly Siamese cat, Chester, left this mortal coil, he climbed up on my mom's lap, shared some of her bagel and cream cheese, just like he did every morning, and then he died. It's a beautiful image of a peaceful and loving final exit. I don't think it really happened. It's what my mom told me happened, but my mom had a way of presenting reality so that it conformed with her inner truth, rather than mere objective fact. So although I didn't witness Chester's death, and I was living in a different state when it happened, I doubted my mom's retelling of the event. I'm not saying my mom was a liar. She just never let the facts get in the way of a good story. When she did stray from the truth, I don't think she even usually realized it. My mom was an entertaining and renowned storyteller. Or maybe not exactly a storyteller. She didn't necessarily use a narrative form to captivate her listeners. But she was constantly sharing anecdotes and scenes and vignettes and interesting tidbits, some of the friend type, and some about immediate family members. For simplicity's sake, I think of all this content as stories. My brother and I call these stories my mom told Big Fish, after the movie and book about a son in the last days of his dad's life, grappling with some of the fantastic tales his dad told throughout his life. The son's relationship with those stories is pretty complex. He is bemused, inspired, and frustrated by them. I can't speak for my brother, but I definitely identify with the son. Trying to share some of my mom's Big Fish stories is challenging. Many would come off as highly confusing without a lot of setup, and our time is limited. So I'll just focus on her lore of my birth. And if you are clamoring for more of her stories, I have blogged about quite a few of them and will probably continue to do so. My mom had a lot of stories about my birth. how she got pregnant even though she was on the pill, and the doctors told her because of that, I was likely to have brain damage and a severe cognitive disability. Also, I was a breech birth, so the doctor asked her if they should break my arm or leg to deliver me. But then eventually I did come out butt first. And because I was born butt first, I was the most beautiful baby because my face wasn't all red and squishy. Oh, I was also born 6 weeks earlier than expected, but I wasn't in the least bit premature. And double O, my mom also made a point of highlighting that she and my dad rarely had sex. In fact, only 2 times. And I was the third kid. Obviously, my mom's big fish stories are important to me because they keep me feeling connected to her. Every time I think of one, especially if I tell one, it keeps her memory and even a bit of her essence alive. It also connects me not only to her, but also to all of those who hear her stories, and especially to my brother and my now deceased sister, and everyone who heard my mom tell her own big fish. These stories also help me make meaning of my mom's life and her death, and my family and myself. They're my inherited mythology. Sometimes these stories feel like a key that helps me unlock some of the mysteries of my mom. Why did she tell some particular strange and funny story over and over, beyond her love of performing, which I definitely relate to? What does this story say about what she valued, how she saw the world, how she saw herself, how she wanted us to see her? Even if I'm completely factually wrong in my theories, the questioning still seems to lead me to some type of truth. Maybe we all have a big fish. Maybe we have a whole school of little fish making a big fish. I hope so. I never did question my mom about just how true her story of Chester's death really was. What would be the point? Chester would still be dead, and the real truth of her story was that he was loved. And my mom wanted to make Chester's death as easy as possible for me because I was loved. And we now turn to a reading from Old Man and the Sea. We join the old man, Santiago, after he has gone farther out to sea than is safe, battled a huge marlin, lashed it to his boat, and between waves of sharks scenting the fish and attacking his boat to get at the flesh. It is silly not to hope, he thought. Besides, I believe it is a sin. But do not think about sin, he thought. There are enough problems now without sin. Also, I have no understanding of it. I have no understanding of it, and I'm not sure that I believe in it. Perhaps it was a sin to kill the fish. I suppose it was, even though I did it to keep me alive and feed many people. But then everything is a sin. Do not think about sin. It is much too late for that, and there are people who are paid to do it. Let them think about it. You were born to be a fisherman, as the fish was born to be a fish. San Pedro was a fisherman, as was the father of the great DiMaggio. But he liked to think about all things that he was involved in, and since there was nothing to read and he did not have a radio, he thought much, and he kept on thinking about sin. You did not kill the fish only to keep alive and to sell for food, he thought. You killed him for pride and because you are a fisherman. You loved him when he was alive, and you loved him after. If you love him, is it not a sin to kill him? Or is it more? You think too much, old man, he said out loud.
When I decided to preach from Old Man in the Sea, I figured this was going to be simple. I was pretty sure I knew Old Man Santiago's story, and it seemed simple enough. Pride got him into this mess, and his pride kept him there. Not just pride, but truly stubborn pride. All he had to do was come home. Instead, he pushes himself and his little boat beyond safe limits. He goes too far out to sea to kill his giant marlin. Yes, it's huge. Yes, he could sell its meat to support himself. Yes, all that fish would help feed people in his village. But he said it himself. You killed him for pride. Because he had gone 84 days without a catch, because people were talking. And when he finally vanquishes his marlin, he is far from port, stuck with a beast of a fish so big he has to lash it to the side of his boat because he can't pull it aboard, knowing full well that his prize catch's trail of blood will be like a dinner bell to the sharks. And sure enough, in our reading, we find Santiago in a brief pause between fighting off waves of sharks. And still, he keeps that damn fish lashed to the boat. He loses his harpoon and his knife to the sharks, is down to beating them off with a stick. All of it in vain as the sharks devour his catch. So this was supposed to be a simple sermon. He lashed himself to this big fish, to his prize, his pride, and he'll be damned if he's gonna let it go. He has been done in by the sin of pride. And by now, you see where I'm going. Pride is the big fish we should cut loose because it makes us do absurd and harmful things. Amen. Nice, simple, short sermon. Let's cut things short and go get coffee. You're welcome. Except, is sin ever simple? Santiago sure didn't think so, and he was just a fisherman. Sin isn't even his job. There are people who are paid to think about it, he mused. Well, shoot, I think he means me. And so I think about it. And I know sin isn't an idea that we Unitarian Universalists like to put a lot of thought into, but my friends, we should. And we should think about it not as a simple thing that we do, but as a condition that we exist in, as the sea that we swim in. Sin as separation from God or the ultimate or the ground of being or whatever it is that you hold up as ultimately important. Separation from each other, separation from ourselves. The choices we make, the actions we take, the resentments we hold can drive us deeper into that sea of sin, farther and farther apart. When he set sail, Santiago was divided. He was divided from his sense of self as a fisherman because he had been failing at it for so long. He was separated from the villagers talking about all those days since he had caught any fish. He was separated maybe even from the very ocean that was the ground, the essence of his being. And so, his pride drove him to take risks, to go too far out to sea, stay out there too long, fight a fish he had no business trying to catch. Maybe pride carried him deeper into sin. But, as Paul wrote in his letter to the Romans, where there is sin, grace too abounds. If sin is separation, then grace is connection or reconnection. In his pride, the old man battled the marlin, but he loved it. And through it, he loved the sea and maybe even the sharks. Yes, he killed the fish for pride, he told himself, but also because you are a fisherman. Because you are. Those days at sea, the battle with the marlin, the lost war with the sharks, all of that was the core of Santiago's being. His interdependence, his coexistence with his villagers, and with the sea itself. Did pride make him do stupid, even sinfully stupid things? Yeah, probably. But that same pride returned him to the sea, and the sea to him, and to what it meant to be him, to the way he connected with his community. Was his pride sinful? Probably. Or was it grace? Yeah, almost certainly. Was it simple? Apparently not. And it's not supposed to be. Often the same forces that might sink us into separation are the very powers that reveal a path to reconciliation. So may we never fool ourselves into thinking that it is simple for anyone to navigate those seas. So may it be, because we make it so. Amen and blessings be.